There's a lot of tools and techniques I use in almost every image, and I figured it'd be kind of fun to talk through them and look at a more realistic view of my everyday workflow and workspace. I'm Abbey with photomanipulation.com, and I feel kinda bad. I feel bad because I feel like a liar. When I do my how-tos, everything is so neatly organized. Step 1 leads to step 2, leads to step 3, and then in the end, we get a nice little image. But that's not how that works, and I even wonder how helpful those types of videos really are. So today I want to break down and give all the little tips and tricks that I usually have to cut out of my more traditional how-tos, as well as talk about the potential usefulness or not so usefulness of how-tos. But first, I want to tell you all about our Ultimate Magic Overlay Bundle from neostock.com. Hundreds of magical swooshes, and super detailed fractal designs. They come in both JPEG and transparent PNG, making them super versatile. I just gotta have those PNGs, man. And I use them all the time in professional work, because not only do they save me tons of time, but I kinda suck at painting magical swooshes and other magical details. Find the link in the description. So for this portrait, I did start off with some slight retouching using frequency separation. I do as minimal retouching as I can. I really just try and prep the areas that will have any major effects applied to them, such as the cheek and chest in this case. But I try and keep as much of the skin's original detail as possible. This includes details that may otherwise be seen as imperfections. To me, they're just character, and they bring a real human element to portraits, in my opinion. So I'll try to keep things like veins and slight smile lines and crow's feet or pores. Things humans have. When it comes to extracting my subjects, nowadays I really like the combination of either select subject and refine edge, or simply hand painting or hand masking out the subject and then also hitting it with some refine edge. This for me gives me the most natural extraction, because I really want all the detail I can grab. That includes things like little threads that may be coming off the shirt, or peach fuzz that may be on the skin. Any little detail like that, I really try and preserve as much as possible, and that's just something the pen tool does not do. I still use the pen tool all the time, but for me the edge is just a little too sharp. For me, at least. I did end up breaking my own rules, however, I mixed two depths. The original stock image has a pretty shallow depth of field, as you can see in her shoulders and in the back part of her hair, while the oil texture is completely in focus. Normally, I would maybe defocus the texture and or swap out the subject if I really wanted to keep that oil paint texture, but here's the thing, I wanted both, so I broke my own rules. If I had a bit more time on this image, because I remember I had a pretty tight deadline of about 3 hours or less, I would have spent more time removing the out of focus hair strands at the very least, and maybe possibly trying to find an alternative background, but what I ended up opting for is to hide the out of focused areas using some oil paint texture that will be added in a little later on, and I think it worked out quite well. For the hair, I did my typical backlit hair effect, which is to duplicate the subject, enlarge the subject, placing it behind the original, and then filling that duplicate with a solid color, usually white and or some kind of off-white, tinted with whatever your main light source might be, or in this case a pastel gradient, since I was going for more of a mixed media effect. With it enlarged and filled with a solid or mostly solid color, then you can hit it with some liquify or the warp tool just to give it some variation. And then once that's done, you can either rasterize the duplicate and then start stamping on hair, which I did, or create new layers and stamp on individual pieces of hair onto that so you can more freely transform them, which is also what I did. For the texture on the shirt here, I made the original mask using the pen tool, but like I said, it ended up being a little too sharp, and so I go in with a normal soft round brush, a default soft round brush, and I bring back that softer edge. This helps immensely when it comes to blending things and making things look more cohesive as opposed to photoshoppy. Now, granted, this sharp edge could be the look you're going for. There are tons of situations, especially when it comes to a more mixed media effect, that you may want this to look at like a more cut out or maybe taped tape effect. But in this case, I wanted the edge of this paint texture to match one for one the original depth and edge of her shirt collar. I also like to make sure everything I work in, all my layers, remain a smart object for as long as possible. If I have to rasterize so I can edit the layer directly, then of course I will, but them being smart objects really helps for, finicking with things like composition and sizing in particular. So I definitely recommend, if you aren't already using smart objects, because I went years without using them, and now I would say that most every layer in my layer stack, especially image layers, are now smart objects, and most of those smart objects also have smart objects inside of them. So in this stock photo, the hair is a wig. The shininess of the wig is the dead giveaway that it is indeed a wig. In order to kind of tone that down and give it a bit more of a natural feel, you can go over it with the mixer brush. I like to set all of my settings to 15% or so, maybe the flow a little bit lower, and you can see my settings up at top if you want to replicate them. And in this case, like I mentioned, I did duplicate the subject and then I had to rasterize that layer in order to use the mixer brush on it. But if you ever need to mattify some shine, whether it be on skin or in this case hair, then the mixer brush, when used in moderation, you can definitely go overboard with the mixer brush if you're not careful. But the mixer brush works wonders in instances like this. So now we're going to move on to color grading, and unfortunately, when it comes to color grading, I mentioned this before, there is really very little method to my madness. I have kind of an idea in my head of what I want the photo's color grade to look like, the colors I want it to be. In this case, I wanted to make sure it stayed very light and airy, with pastels, and especially purples and blues and pinks. And so I made sure to keep those colors intact or increased and enhanced those in colors in particular. When doing my color grades, I do a stack of layer adjustments right at the top that I can toggle on and off as needed, and then I can also adjust as I go. This will just be the initial color grade, and then I'll kind of go ahead and fiddle with them as I move on with the image. I like doing an initial color grade just so I get a better feel how the final image will look, because sometimes color grades can make a huge difference. I have images that are almost unrecognizable once you flip that color grade off, and sometimes they're a good 20 to 30 layers of adjustment layers, of various different adjustment layers. However, my top three are color lookup layers, selective color, and curve adjustments. Those are my main ways of color grading an image. Definitely mainly color lookup. And how I go about it really is as simple as I create a color lookup and I scroll through all the default color lookups one by one. And I kind of know what does what nowadays, but I just mix and match and adjust. I adjust opacities, I will play with layer modes, I'll play with my favorite tool, Blend If. I'll probably end up doing a second video all about 3D LUT files. I did a beginner's guide that I'll link up in the corner there, because they really are an amazing tool that I think can be underutilized. Some people don't even know about them. I think that's a crying shame. For the oil paint effect, I just duplicated the background texture, placed it above all other layers, and used a oil paint brush to mask in some little oil paint details by brushing up. Sometimes I would lower the flow. I say most of the time I lower the flow of my brush to sub 25%, just so I can really build things up slowly. I didn't want to fake a painted effect, more so incorporate a more realistic paint effect on top of a photo, if that makes sense. Mixed media. I also spent some time bringing out the blue veins in her chest and skin, as they matched the blue pastels in the painter effect, in the oil paint effect. And I like bringing out cohesive details like that. And I've also just always really loved the look of blue veins underneath skin. Here I'm finishing off that backlit hair effect by bringing in some lit hair strands onto the inner portion of the hair, as it was before. All of the hair that was, this bright pastel white essentially was focused on the outside, where these are some strands that are actually overlapping her hair. For a long time I didn't do this. This was kind of an obvious evolution to this really stylized backlit hair effect, and it's definitely needed. You want to bring at least some level of hair on top of the subject themselves to make it look less flat. In this case, actually, I am masking the subject out. Usually, and that's because I have the pastel gradient underneath, usually this is a solid hair color, like I said, white or some kind of off-white, and so I would just create a new layer and stamp the hair strands on new layers. That way I can avoid affecting the subject's original mask. Though in this case, I was pretty confident that I needed these hair strands, so no harm done. Layer masks, adjustment layers, smart objects, those are your 3 non-destructive tools that I highly suggest you learn to love. I did originally want this image to have way more leeches. I think I mentioned this before, and I really kind of bailed on that idea due to time restraints, and I definitely regret it. Part of me wants to go back and add in the leeches that I kind of bailed on, including the one on the shoulder and on the inner part of the cheek that you'll see here coming up. But I know I'll never, I never will. I always suggest taking the time to really refine your masks and extractions. I know nowadays a lot of Photoshop work is kind of, what it looks like small, right? Because what is it going to look like on Instagram? How is it going to post on TikTok? What's it going to look like in a thumbnail? But if you focus on the small details, you'll end up with something a bit more special, I think, and a bit higher quality, and people notice the effort put in. I'm worried that nowadays that people are so focused on the literal big picture, the literal zoomed out picture, and everything is quick select and auto selected because you're not looking at the edges, that the kind of art of the detail is starting to die a little bit. It makes complete sense, especially when it comes to matte painting, or if you have a deadline where you have an hour to just photo bash something and that's just your job, that's what you need to do. But if it's personal and it's something you're really trying to be proud of, zoom in every once in a while and make sure it looks just as good at 100% as it does, 25%. Especially with portraits. You'll notice it with portraits. Not so much with landscapes. But portraits, I think they need a little bit more love. That was super lame thing to say, but it's what I think. Again, I'm using the mixer brush to tone down some of these highlights and make it a bit softer to match the pastel vibes with these leeches. Making sure everything is just a bit more cohesive. I also want to point out how this was not a linear process. When I do how-tos and stuff, I always create an image at least twice, if not 3 times. The first time usually is my prototype, right? It's just my sketch to kind of figure out what stock images am I using, how am I putting them together, and they're all very just sloppily thrown together, and so I have a blueprint for what I want to do. The second time is the completion of the image. I put together something in full. However, I don't usually screen record this process. I don't screen record most of the time, as I'm always painfully aware that I'm being watched. But I just use my normal workflow and my chaotic layers, and I have a vision in my mind and I'm getting it done, and a general goal of what I'm going to teach with this image. And the third time is the proper image that will be taught. And it's different from the second because I go through and I organize all the layers. I name them and I reorganize them. And I create a step-by-step that is inherently, however, false. Because that step-by-step isn't what I did in the workflow. I don't do all my hair at once and then move on to skin and then move on to the leeches and then I do all the shadows at once. I go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is largely to keep me interested. If I work in an area too long, I might get bored, I might get frustrated, and to kind of, give me some relief from whatever is not working out, I'll move on to an area I'm more excited about. But with tutorials, it's kind of giving this false idea where I did step 1 and then I moved on to step 2 and I moved on to step 3 and then the image was done. And that's literally never the case for me. I don't know other people's workflow. I was very insecure about that. Maybe that is how other people's workflow works. I can only confirm that it's just not how mine works. I do organize my layers about every 60 minutes. I do try and go through and at least make some vague semblance of organization, throw some things in some groups, name some layers. If it's super complicated, I'll start using colors, layer colors, stuff like that. But how-tos are a hyper sterile, and like I said, kind of like falsely linear version of whatever the image I made. And so I always wonder how actually helpful they are. Because if they're not actually how I created the image, and it's almost to the point where I also have to remove anything that just, I always say, muddies the waters, right? So instead of using this type of layer in order to keep things to be a little bit more neat and tidy, I will change that layer to something else to make it easier to understand, easier to explain. I keep the flow of the tutorial in mind when, doing this final third edit. And so I just question how helpful they actually are, because they teach you how to do an effect using these images in this way. But I don't know if they put enough emphasis on what is actually important, which is intuition. Here's a bag of tools, here's a bag of materials, make something. And I'll show you how to use the tools, and I'll show you how to use the materials, but can you make something without me showing you how to make it. That should always be the goal, is to build your intuition. So I know it can be frustrating sometimes when you're following a tutorial and you're like, well, I need these images. I can't learn from the tutorial unless I have the images. I guarantee you, if you just find alternative images that just fit the best they can, right? From Pexels or something, anything, any free any stock image source, and you just try, you'll learn so much more than if you were to one-for-one recreate that tutorial. I promise you. I never watched how-tos, I never read tutorials. I just banged my head up against the wall until something happened. Now granted, it took me a long time to be able to do what I do. And sometimes I don't know if what I do is even that impressive. And so I can certainly help you cut down on the banging of the head. But, maybe a little banging of the head. And like I said, build up intuition, build up confidence, and then kind of build up your reverse engineering skills. Look at an image and just try to recreate it the best as you can. I guarantee you'll learn more from doing that than by following any how-to tutorial. That being said, I will never stop doing how-tos. I know people really like them, and of course you do get educational content from how-tos. It's literally what they're there for. I'm just saying, maybe when you watch a how-to, like I said, go find your own stock images. Maybe that are nothing like what's in that tutorial, and try and recreate it. And when you happen upon a step that just isn't working out, right? And it seems so easy in the tutorial, but it's not working out for this image. Figure out how to make it work. It doesn't have to be the way they do it. It doesn't have to be the way I do it. Just figure out how to make it work, and that's how you'll build up your intuition. But like I said, how-tos aren't going anywhere. I love doing them. I write down all your requests, so if you ever want to request a specific how-to, especially based on something you maybe have seen me do already, feel free, 100% open to it. I'm still very passionate about doing them. I just want to put a little emphasis on the bashing of your head up against that wall, because it's a helpful skill to have. Being a bit of a glutton for punishment. Being stubborn and being a glutton for punishment. That is a useful skill to have. So for the leeches, for the skin folds, I'm going to put the brush pack I use for all my kind of bumpy skin effects, my bumpy skin deformations. I'll put the link to the brush pack below. It is a premium brush pack, but I think it's like $4 to $6, and it's so incredibly worth it. It's not, instant. You gotta kind of figure out how you want to use it and how you like to use it. But it's amazing. It's from an amazing artist whose work I adore, and I don't want to say his name because I'll absolutely butcher it. But I'll definitely put the links to those brushes down below. For all these little highlights, you'll see me painting, and for the future tiers coming up. If you think this image looks familiar, it's because it was 100% already in a tutorial on how to paint those tiers. So if you are a fan of how-tos, luckily, I do have one already for you. I'll link that up above. Back to the how-to subject, let me know how helpful you find them. Do you find the one-for-one, step-for-step to be the absolute most helpful, and you do get genuinely permanent knowledge from them, where you're just like, yes, I will now use that in my future work, and it will work every time? Or do you find yourself being like, I try and recreate the effect, but if I don't have those images, if I'm not in that exact scenario, they just don't work out and I can't get them to work? And in which case, would you like more general tips where it's, this is how this works and this is how to apply it, but it's not so one-for-one, step-to-step, here are the exact settings that will work on this exact image? More so, why are we doing this? Why are we choosing the settings, right? I don't know. Let me know. Something to think about. I make these videos for you guys. So I'm always willing to shift directions. And then for the final round of oil paint texture, I did essentially the same thing I did with the shirt, only this time I duplicated the actual background oil paint texture, stretch it up a little bit, just give a little bit of variation in the pattern that will be occurring, and then I used a plain old oil paint brush. It might be the one that comes default in with Photoshop, I'm not sure. They're all pretty similar, so just find whatever one you think fits the bill. And I made very slight upward strokes to drag that paint up, or give the appearance that I'm dragging the paint up. Realistically, I am just masking back in a texture. And there is no other fancy effects to that. I'm literally just masking in a bit of texture in a certain pattern or motion. No need to do any liquefying or mixer brush or overpainting. Just some good old masking. However, if you want some solid colors or the colors aren't working out, then creating a regular old normal layer and color picking from the oil paint texture and then putting in some solid color will really sell that mixed media effect and give you just a more solid concentration of color. In this case, I wanted to add a lot more of that blue to the lower portion of the portrait, and I couldn't really do that because most of the blue in the texture is centered towards the top. So in this case, I just, on a normal layer, painted in some blue. Nothing fancy at all. I also wanted to bring in some of that pastel purple. Though again, see, once I am bringing in whole new colors and being fancy, it didn't work out as well as much. But you get a little pastel purple in there every once in a while. It worked out. I'm very good friends with the undo button. Especially when painting. When doing stuff like this, just take your time and be patient. You know, when things are sped up, it makes it look so easy and like they did it so quick, when realistically, I was probably sitting here flinging specks of digital paint on a portrait for like, I don't know, close to 20 minutes, maybe longer. So don't let time lapses fool you, because they used to fool me. They used to make me feel like everyone knew what they were doing. And they're all just as confused as I am. And we're going to finish up, like I said, back to those, adding small details. Here, she's crying, and she has very visible makeup, mainly mascara. And so we definitely want to add in some running mascara. Stuff like that is absolutely noticeable. It's almost like image continuity. If this is happening, then that would be happening. If it's raining in the photo, then the subject's hair would be wet. If the subject's hair is dry and it's raining in a photo, then that creates a weird continuity. A big one is with mermaids, when people try and do mermaids, but the hair is flat and visibly dry despite being under water. That creates a huge disconnect. So keep things like that in mind. How would your subject's environment be affecting the subject? In this case, tears would be creating, or the tears would be causing the mascara to run. And it's just done on a normal layer with a grungy brush. It's very, very subtle. If you'll notice, I'll paint down a bunch, and then I'll erase a bunch, then I'll paint down a bunch, then I'll erase a bunch. Again, all on a normal layer, no special settings here. And to finish off, this is something I've been doing quite a lot recently. I like to take all of my layers, every single one, and convert this PSD into a smart object, and then on that smart object, using a plugin like Optics, I like to add any final effects. Optics is a premium plugin that I do have an affiliate code with, so you can get 25% off the plugin, link down in the description. It's my absolute favorite plugin because it has a ton of different effects. I believe here I just added a bit of a fine grain, which again I just love doing nowadays. I think it helps get rid of that kind of overly photoshopped effect. Just adds a bit of grit, especially to something like this, which is a mixed media image. It helps sell the effect a bit more. Then I went ahead and sharpened it a bit as well to really bring out that gritty texture. And again, this is all applied on a smart object that I can always double click on and then go in and adjust my original layers just as well. It would just now be a smart object that I would save, and that would then update on this image. And that's just kind of what I've been enjoying doing lately. And that is going to be the end of this little impromptu walkthrough. Not really walkthrough, I guess. It's more of a rant or ramble through. I'm super busy now. I'm working on the course. I'm trying to get that done as quick as I can. I'm just always perpetually behind, I feel like. So don't worry if you didn't enjoy this. It's going to be super, super rare. I just wanted to make sure I got out a video and hopefully could still give out some helpful tips in the process. And if you want to know step for step how I go about painting tears, like in this exact image, in fact, go ahead and check out my how to paint tears video. Free brush set is included. I'm Abbey Esparza with photomanipulation.com. See you next time.